Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I have a question for you. Do you believe in reincarnation? In this true crime community, we look at the most gruesome details related to murders and crimes. Let's investigate some of the stories that serve as proof that we don't just live once. There are thousands of testimonies from children who claim to have lived before. They give accurate details of who they were in a past life. They remember people, places, names, and even how they died. Let's take a look at experiences described by parents who got chills when their kids described past lives. James Leininger, the kid who used to be a World War II fighter pilot. When he was only 2 years old, James started having vivid nightmares about a man named Lieutenant James McCready Houston. His mother said in 2013 that he had night terrors about being in a plane that got shot down and crashed into the water, and then he couldn't get out. At 3 years old, he started to draw pictures of fighter jets in battles, and even though he did not yet knew how to write his name, he began signing those drawings with James 3. He was very adamant about knowing the name of his fellow pilots, and he also knew the name of the ship from which his plane took off from. Because the parents became worried about James, they started to look into the details he was giving them, and after research, they realized he was describing events from the World War II as if he lived them himself. The man he was talking about, James McCready Houston, was actually a pilot who died on March 3, 1945 when his plane crashed. Ryan Hammonds, the boy who used to live in Hollywood. At 5 years old, Ryan said to his mother, "I have something I need to tell you. I used to be somebody else." The preschooler would then talk about going home to Hollywood and would cry to his mother to take him there. His mother said he would tell stories about meeting stars like Rita Hayworth, traveling overseas on lavish vacations, dancing on Broadway, and working for an agency where people would change their names. She said her son even recalled that the street he lived on had the word rock in it. Then they found a picture. That photo, in one of the books from the library, was a publicity shot from 1932 movie Night After Night, starring Mae West in her film debut. Ryan remembers telling his mother, "That's me, that's who I was," pointing at an extra in the movie who had no lines in the scene. After weeks of research, a film archivist combing through original production materials for the movie was able to confirm who he was. His name, Marty Martyn, a former movie extra who later became a powerful Hollywood agent and died in 1964. After digging through old records, almost none of them available on the internet, and tracking down Martin's own daughter, Tucker was able to confirm 55 details Ryan gave about his life. It turns out Martin wasn't just a movie extra. Just as Ryan said, he had also danced on Broadway, he traveled overseas to Paris, and worked at an agency where stage names were often created for new clients. Ryan's claim that he lived on the street with the word rock in it was nearly spot on. Martin lived at 825 North Roxbury in Beverly Hills. Other obscure facts that Ryan gave were also confirmed. These facts include how many children Martin had, how many times he was married, even how many sisters he had. While Martin's own daughter grew up thinking her father had just one sister, it was later confirmed that he actually had two, just as Ryan claimed. The boy who used to be Lou Gehrig. On the way to their seats to watch the Red Sox versus the Yankees, Christian stopped dead in his tracks in front of a photo of Babe Ruth, yelling, "I do not like him. He was mean to me." He was so upset they had to leave the stadium. Back home in Los Angeles, Christian began saying things like, "When I was tall like Daddy, I was a baseball player." He used to stay in hotels every night, travel mostly on trains, and had been obsessed with baseball. His mother said, the year Christian turned 3, his recollections of being a baseball player in the golden days became more vivid, and he continued to insist that Babe Ruth was not a nice man. I kept notes of the strange things he'd say, Googling them later. His older sister Charlotte and I would listen intently as he shared stories with us before falling asleep at night. He told us of times when the Dodgers played in New York and said his games took place during the day because there were no lights on the field. I found out that baseball teams used to keep cow femurs on the dugout for bone rubbing, technique for hardening and preserving bats. I was stunned when each thing he told us proved to be historically accurate. At the advice of Carol Bauman, a therapist who specializes in children's past life memories, I showed Christian photos of baseball players from Babe Ruth's time. Much to my surprise, he pointed to a man with dimples in a photograph of the 1927 Yankees and said, "That's me." I later discovered that the man he had pointed to was Lou Gehrig. I also learned about a well-documented feud between Gehrig and Ruth that led the former friends not to speak to each other for 7 years. When I showed Christian a photo of Lou Gehrig's parents, he was able to identify their names and pointed to the mother and said, "You were her." This was odd to say the least. Sam Taylor, the kid who used to be his own grandfather. When he was 1.5, Sam looked up as his father was changing his diapers and said, "When I was your age, I used to change your diapers." He began talking more about having been his grandfather. He eventually told details of his grandfather's life that his parents felt certain he could not have learned through normal means, such as the fact that his grandfather's sister had been murdered and that his grandmother had used the food processor to make milkshakes for his grandfather every day at the end of his life. Cameron Macaulay, the kid who remembered and dearly missed his other parents. When Cameron was 6, he drew pictures of a single-story house next to the beach on the Scottish island of Barra. But we're from Glasgow. Virtually, the third word that came out of my son's mouth was Barra. He would tell everyone, "I'm a Barra boy, I'm a Barra boy." He kept telling me over and over he was worried that his Barra parents would be missing him, and he really wanted to go back there. At first, we just put his stories down to a vivid imagination. It was awful and went on for years. He used to cry for his Barra mom. He said she'd been missing him, and he wanted to let his family in Barra know he was all right. He was desperate to return there. It was very distressing. The girl who died before. When my daughter was about 3 or 4, she approached me while I was reading a card sent by a family member. The picture on the front was of a little boat on a lake. She pointed to it and said, "I've been on a boat like that." "Really?" I asked, knowing she had never been out on any boat. She said, in a somber tone, "Yeah, I died there." The boy who was on the Titanic. My 4-year-old nephew talks about being on the Titanic all the time. He said he was with his wife and that it was really cold. The boy who was hit by a car. He was 3 and pretending to run over his Lego man. When asked to stop, he said, "That's how I died, isn't it?" "No, you've never died." "Yes, I have. When I was 2 last time. The car hit me, my other mommy cried, then I came to you." The girl who wasn't born before. My friend had a miscarriage before she had her first daughter. A few years ago, when her daughter was about 4, a group of us were at a party. Her daughter was sitting on her lap and said something along the lines, "I'm sorry I left you before, mommy. I was hurting really bad and I wasn't ready." My friend asked her what she meant, and her daughter said she left her before she was born, but came back. The boy who was a friendly old man. While chatting with my 4-year-old son, he started going into vivid descriptions of being a friendly old man who his neighbors were fond of. He gave a description of what he used to look like and then how he died, how he felt once he died, and how he woke up again while being born. The way he talked made it seem like he was recalling going to the zoo the previous weekend. He was so casual about it that when he looked at my expression on my face, he said, "What? What's wrong?" The boy who never made it to 5 years old before. First, when my son was 3, he told me that he was once kidnapped and the police accidentally shot and killed him when they were trying to rescue him. When he turned 5, he told me he had never made it this far. Also, when he was 5, we drove past my grandparents' old house. They have been gone 16 and 18 years now. He told me, "I used to play in that house with Papi," my dad, when I was little. Except the house used to be white. The house did indeed used to be white, and it had been painted an ugly gray. My dad also had 9 siblings, 3 of which died in infancy. The girl who used to be married. My daughter would freak out and start crying and screaming while repeating, Why? I got married. I just got married. I got married." Over and over again, with this tone filled with grief that I never heard come out of a child so small. 2.5 is pretty young to be sobbing your heart out. It was a cry that I had only ever heard from adults who have lost the love of their life. The girl who used to be a gardener. I'm a nanny to twin 4-year-olds. They are both extremely bright, but the girl never stops talking. For the past few months, she's been talking about when I was a gardener before I was a kid. The stuff she says isn't stuff she should know about, considering she watches an hour of TV a day and it's Sesame Street or Blue's Clues. Some of the details change, like where she lived and stuff, but the following details are always the same. Her name was Ag, she was a grown-up and didn't have a mom or dad, but she had a husband and a baby named Maina. The baby got taken away by someone and she tried to get her back, but she never did. and she doesn't know what happened to her because she couldn't remember anymore after she became a kid herself. But that Mina is probably a grown-up now because this happened a really long time ago, she thinks. She doesn't remember her husband's name, but he yelled at her all the time. She planted flowers and trees and also painted pictures of them. She saw a man get tied up and thrown on the ground and pulled behind the car until he was bleeding really crazy all over the place. She tried to help him, but she doesn't remember anything else about that. Her mom asked if she wants to be a gardener when she grows up, and she responded, "No, I told you I already was a gardener when I was a grown-up, but now I'm a kid, so I'm just a kid and I can't have a job." Now, if you watch a lot of stuff related to children saying crazy stuff or talking about their past lives, you know that in the comment section of those videos, you always find the experiences that other people had with regards to this. The following are the most interesting comments that I found while researching this. When my son was about 4 or 5, he began talking about his other mommy named Anna. He talked about her like it was nothing out of the ordinary. I explained to him that I, of course, was his only mommy. However, he was insistent about Anna. I brushed it off until shortly later I curiously asked him about her, and he explained to me that Anna drowned him and then herself. I was really freaked out, but didn't let him be aware of how I felt. I acted as if it was no big deal. He never brought her up again. I mentioned her to him a few times after that, simply to see if his story stayed the same. It did. About a year or so later, I was teaching him how to properly take a shower instead of baths. He was terrified to put his head under the shower water as it fell. He's going to be 8 years old soon. He will not wash the front of his hair correctly because of his fear of not being able to breathe. He likes to swim and play in water, but if his face gets too wet, he nearly has a panic attack. I mean, talk about a traumatic experience. When my daughter was 4 to 5 years old, she told me, "I used to be a lady living in a white house with a garden of roses. I drank tea from a cup with painted roses on it. I was an artist. I had a friend called Marika. We walked to the market through the lanes. We bought bread, wine, cheese, and fish." She described the house and garden so vividly, her style of dress and so much more. I think it was around the early 1900s. She said her name was Anna. After a couple of weeks, she just stopped talking about it. However, she became a botanical artist in his life. She is now 41. I have never discussed it with her since then. When my older brother was about 3 years old, he would regularly tell my mother stories that all started with, "When I was a soldier and you were my child." My 4-year-old son recalls his past life when he was a dad before and my husband was his dad, but I wasn't his mom. He remembers having children and one of them drowning to death after swimming in floodwaters and was hit on the head by a floating log. He also remembers the house he lived in, cars he had, he lived on a farm, both of his wives, the first one died. He recalls vivid details about what they were wearing, his dog, and riding out on horses to get the cattle. He also recalls saving animal lives where he worked. My son, when he was around 4 or 5, one day started telling me about his old mommy. He said she had black hair and wasn't nice. He said she used to hurt him. Bang, bang, bang were his words to describe that. And one day he fell asleep and when he woke up, I was his new mommy. He has a birthmark at the base of his skull and has a speech delay. The mark is actually where the language part of our brain is. He is also autistic. He only ever told me this story once, but I found it strange, so who knows? I have a cousin named Tegan. One day her mother took her to a graveyard to refurnish a grave, and she was skipping around the graveyard. Before they left, she skipped to the car, then stopped at a random grave. She looked down, pointed to the grave and said, "I used to be her," then skipped to the car. My mom told me that when my sister was 3, she said, "Remember when I was your mom and I had short black hair and used to take you to the store to buy ice cream?" That still freaks me out to this day. My oldest daughter and youngest son both remember their past lives. At 3, my daughter told me she froze to death going to get food for her kids in a storm. My son, at 2, told me his other mom and him were in the water. At 3, he was able to tell me that they were on a boat that capsized and he was swimming but he fell asleep, and when he woke up, he was Bradley, his name now. Both stopped talking about their past lives at about 5. This concerns me. My sister used to say that she lived at a different house and that she missed her brother Max, even though it's just me and her and we are both girls. She explained in great detail about a house in the valley and how her mom and dad did drugs and how she lived with her aunt. My nephew randomly came up to me today while playing with Legos and said, "You know soldiers?" I replied, "Yeah." He then says, "You know they don't actually die, right?" I just sat and listened because I was confused, and he followed up with, "You used to be a soldier, so was I." And I got shivers down my spine, dude. He's never said anything like this, and I don't see why he'd even talk about it. He's 5. Shortly after my son turned 4, driving home one day, and he suddenly blurted out, "I died." I didn't know that he knew what it meant to die. I asked how he died, and he told me he burned up. I was very shocked and asked what he meant. He said he had been driving in a truck but went off the road and down a hill, then crashed into a tree. The truck caught fire and he burned up. Totally creeped me out and I didn't ask any more questions. He never mentioned it again. As a 4-year-old, my son was driving with my husband and said, "When I was an old man, I had a car like that one," pointing at the 56 Chevy. When my son was 5, he started telling me about when he lived in Egypt. He talked about a pyramid that he would go inside. Right then I thought that he was making the story up because I thought that pyramids were solid and that you couldn't go inside them. Years later, while watching a documentary, I learned that you can actually go inside the pyramid. I was stunned. I was babysitting for a Navy family. As the wife was pregnant, prior to meeting her or the youngest daughter, I only babysat the older one until she and the little one got back from vacation. I was standing outside a few blocks away. All of a sudden, this 3-year-old child came running to me, the youngest one that I'd never met before, jumped into my arms and said, "I missed you so much." I told her that we never met, and she replied, "Yes, we have. You were my mommy before we died." My daughter remembers bits from her previous 2 past lives. She was a child of about 4 or 5, not sure if boy or girl, in southeast London during the Blitz. She remembers the sound of loud bangs, then she was dead beside her mother. She has pale brown birthmarks on the right of her neck where shrapnel cut her main blood vessels open. When she was a toddler, she was frightened of the sound of veg being chopped on a board and eggs being broken. Bonfire night was terrifying for her. Before this, she was an adult male in the 18th century. She remembers fixing a sword through the wooden planks of a barn wall, then running onto it to commit suicide. When she is very tired or feeling down in spirit, she gets aches in her chest where the sword went in. I remember my daughter when she was 4, I would pick her up from school and drive my way home, and she would say, "Where are you going?" I would answer her, "We are going home." And she would say, "No, you're not. You're going the wrong way. I live in a big blue house." And I would play along and ask her, "Who do you live with?" She says, "With my mom." Then she would say that I was not her mom, that her mother was waiting for her at her big blue house, and insisted that I was going the wrong way. My daughter used to say she had a sister and that she fell on a rock and died. She was my only kid at the time. I'm pretty sure that she died an old woman. She named all her stuffed animals Mabel, Pearl, Stella. When my son was a toddler, he used to have an invisible friend named Jim. One day he was standing in his crib looking at the empty corner and telling, "Jim, those aren't my real parents. My real parents died when the house burned down." I looked up my husband's family history. Sure enough, he had relatives who died in a house fire in a nearby small village about 80 years prior to us getting married. Yeah. What do you guys think? Do you have any experiences that can relate to this? Could you please leave them in the comments so that we can start a discussion? If you want to know about a true crime crazy story, click the link on the screen and go watch this video. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. See you next time. Bye bye.